The weight of the wine tray felt heavier than it should have. Maybe it was the silence, that brittle, unnatural silence that had settled into La Rouse just after 9. Or maybe it was the man by table 7, the one who didn't order, didn't look at the menu, didn't smile. He just waited. Racheal Zackary moved like she always did, quietly, invisibly, the way good waitresses learn to. But her eyes, sharp and trained from a lifetime of watching what wasn't said, didn't miss it. The man reached beneath the table, slid something metallic along the beam, then walked out without ever making eye contact. She knew a decoy when she saw one. Her father used to tell her, back when his knuckles were still bloodied from the alley jobs he never explained, it's not who stays, it's who leaves too quickly. That voice echoed in her skull now as her pulse kicked hard against her collar. The pen in her apron pocket shook slightly as she scribbled the words on the back of a torn receipt. Don't sit. Something's under your table. Her hand moved before her mind could catch up, before the fear could paralyze her. Because something deeper than instinct, something older, told her this wasn't a joke. It was a message. And it was meant to kill someone. She reached out just as the front doors opened. He stepped in, sharp navy suit, tattooed hands, steel-cut jaw, and the room fell into the kind of hush that came with thunder. Boris Palermo. The man half the city feared and the other half owed. Racheal met his eyes for a fraction of a second and handed him the note. Before we continue, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more exciting stories that you won't want to miss. The restaurant had cleared in record time, not with panic, but with the cold precision of men who didn't ask questions. One moment, the hum of cutlery and murmured conversations. The next, shadows moved, quiet commands exchanged, and a circle of stillness formed around table 7. Racheal stood at the edge of it, shoulders stiff, arms at her sides, watching as 2 men in black coats lifted the linen-draped table and slipped a device out from underneath. Small, black, wired too carefully to be fake. A third man muttered something into a radio, and the fourth nodded once at Boris before heading out the back door. Racheal still held her tray, now empty, now useless, her heart pounding as if it hadn't yet caught up to the stillness around her. No one had spoken to her yet. Not properly. One of Boris's men had gently taken the note back from his hand, folded it, and slipped it into a breast pocket like it was evidence in a case that would never go to court. Boris had remained standing by the entrance, one hand in his coat pocket, his expression unreadable. He hadn't looked away from her since reading the note. Not once. His gaze wasn't angry, it was something stranger. Like calculation and curiosity had collided. Then finally, a man with graying temples and a coat 2 sizes too large stepped toward her. His voice was calm, almost fatherly. "Miss Zackary, yes?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "We're going to ask you a few things." "Not here. Somewhere quieter." Racheal felt her spine lock. "Am I in trouble?" The man gave a tight smile. "No, but what you saw might have just saved a man's life. That buys you a conversation." She didn't argue. What else could she do? Her knees felt made of water, and the cold air that hit her when they guided her out the side door made her shiver like a switch had been flipped inside her coat. They led her down the alley where La Rouse's kitchen staff usually smoked on breaks, only tonight it was clear, silent, swept clean of witnesses. A dark SUV waited near the curb. Tinted windows. Engine running. Boris hadn't spoken a word, but he watched her get in. Inside the car, heat blasted through vents and leather seats creaked beneath her. The man with the gray temples slid in beside her, pulled out a small notepad, and clicked a pen. "Let's make this simple," he said. "What did you see?" Racheal clenched her hands in her lap. A man in a gray jacket. Clean-shaven. Came in around 8:45. Didn't order. Sat at table 7 for less than 2 minutes. Slipped something under the table and left. The man scribbled quickly. "You're sure he didn't speak to anyone?" She nodded. "Did you know the table was reserved?" "Everyone on staff knows who table 7 is for," she said. "It's always empty until he comes." The man paused. "Why'd you warn him?" The question struck deeper than she expected. Not because she didn't have an answer, but because she hadn't let herself think about it yet. "I don't know," she said slowly. Instinct. Fear. Maybe. Maybe I just didn't want to see a man die. He tilted his head, as if weighing her honesty. Do you know who Boris Palermo is? Her eyes flicked to the window. Everyone in Chicago knows who he is. And you still handed him a note instead of running? I wasn't raised to run. The man didn't press. He closed the notebook, nodded once, and tapped the driver's shoulder. The SUV pulled away from the alley, merging into traffic like just another piece of the city. They drove in silence for a while, winding through streets Racheal only half recognized, not back toward her apartment, not toward La Rouse. Somewhere else. Finally, they turned onto a quiet, tree-lined street and stopped in front of a modest townhouse. The man gestured for her to follow. The interior was warm, quiet, surprisingly lived in. Bookshelves lined the walls. A single lamp lit the living room. No guards, no threat. Just Boris, standing by the fireplace, turning a small glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked up as she entered, his gaze settling on her like weight, not malice. Sit, he said. Not unkindly. Not demanding. Just final. Racheal obeyed. She perched at the edge of a low leather chair, trying not to let her nerves show. Boris didn't speak right away. He studied her. You didn't flinch when they found the device, he said finally. You didn't panic. You didn't lie. Why? She licked her lips. I've seen worse. Worse than a bomb under a table with my name on it? Her jaw clenched. Yes. Boris set his glass down. What's your name? Racheal Zackary. Where are you from? South Side. My dad worked construction. Mom cleaned offices. I work nights. A pause. What else? He asked. What aren't you saying? Racheal met his eyes then. You already have someone checking that, don't you? His lips curved, not quite a smile, but something close. Yes. She swallowed. Then I won't waste your time pretending I'm just a waitress. Boris leaned back in his chair, the shadows of the fireplace flickering across his jaw. I don't know what your angle is yet, he said. But you saved my life tonight. That buys you something few people ever get. Racheal's voice was quiet. And what's that? A second look. He stood, crossed the room, and stopped in front of her. You can go home now. We'll drive you. She hesitated. And after that? You'll be left alone. Something in his tone made her skin prickle. Unless you need help again. She rose slowly, her legs still stiff with adrenaline. Thank you, she said, unsure if she meant it. Boris simply nodded. She was dropped off just past midnight. Her apartment looked the same, quiet, dimly lit by the hallway bulb, nothing out of place. But when she slid her key into the lock, the door pushed open too easily. Not forced. Just unlocked. And Racheal knew without question, someone had been here. She stepped inside carefully, reaching for the kitchen drawer where she kept her father's old switchblade. The living room smelled faintly of cigarette smoke. Not hers. Not her neighbor's. The curtains were slightly shifted. The rug had a footprint that didn't match her shoes. A glass she hadn't used sat by the sink, a single drop of water beating near its rim. They hadn't stolen anything. They hadn't wrecked the place. But someone wanted her to know they could reach her. That she wasn't invisible. That maybe next time, she wouldn't be warned. She slept with the blade under her pillow that night. Not because she expected to use it, but because sleeping without it now felt like asking for something to go wrong. The city beyond her window never truly slept. Sirens, horns, wind, all the usual noise. But that night, they sounded different. Like the city was waiting to see what she'd do next. And somewhere across town, in a room where the heat whispered against wood-paneled walls, Boris Palermo stood by his window, looking down at the street below. He held a folder in one hand, slim, but telling. Inside it, birth records, police reports, one yellowed article from 15 years ago about a murder on Archer Avenue. And one photo of a girl, maybe 7 years old, standing beside a man with broken knuckles and wary eyes. Boris tapped the file once against his palm. You're not just a waitress, Racheal Zackary, he murmured. You're a ghost from a world I thought was already buried. And for the first time in many years, he felt something stir that wasn't fear, wasn't suspicion, but something sharper. Curiosity. The second time she was called in, it wasn't through a driver or a message slipped through a kitchen door. It was a man in a gray coat, waiting at her table during the lunch shift, holding a small silver lighter with Boris's crest engraved in its side. "Mr. Palermo requests your time," he said softly, as if asking for a favor instead of delivering an order. Racheal looked down at the unfinished salad on her tray and nodded without a word. Something about the man's eyes told her this wasn't a question, and something inside her said it had already begun, whatever this was. This time, they didn't take her to the townhouse. They drove deeper into the city, to a quiet street near the waterfront, lined with buildings that looked like they hadn't been touched since the 1950s. The interior was minimalist: glass, leather, steel. A large desk sat near the back of the room, papers perfectly aligned, a decanter of dark liquor untouched. Boris stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the snow tap gently against the pane like it was asking permission to fall harder. He didn't turn when she entered. "Sit," he said, his voice lower than she remembered. Racheal obeyed. There was no performance this time. No measured stares or veiled authority. Just a man, quiet, and the air between them, thick with something unspoken. Finally, he turned, holding a folder in his hand, worn at the edges, but sealed with a brass clip. He didn't speak as he placed it on the table in front of her. Just stared at it for a moment, like he wasn't sure if it should be opened. Then he looked at her. "You're not surprised to see that, are you?" Racheal met his gaze. No, he nodded once, slow, as if confirming something to himself. "Your father's name was Samuel Zackary." "Yes." "Worked out of the Callisto crew in the late 90s. Racheal remained silent. He was their fist. Their shadow. Quiet, but brutal when needed. "He left," she said. "When I was 9. Boris's brow lifted slightly. "People like him don't leave, Racheal. They vanish. There's a difference." She blinked. "We moved. New neighborhood. Mom said it was for safety. And 3 years later, she was dead." The words dropped between them like a knife, dull and heavy. Racheal inhaled slowly, not flinching, but the pain behind her eyes flared like it still lived under her skin. Drive-by. They never caught anyone. Just a shadow car and a bullet meant for silence. Boris leaned back in his chair. "That wasn't a random hit." "I know," she whispered. "You never asked questions?" "I was 12. I was told to move on." "But you didn't." "No," she said. "I learned to listen. To watch. Like my father used to." She paused. "I know I've been followed before." That made Boris narrow his eyes, the way a man might when someone sees too much. "How long have you known?" "Since I was 17, she said. "Never the same person twice. Different shoes. Different coats. Always half a step behind. But never close enough to catch." Boris didn't hide his surprise. "Most people don't notice. Most people didn't grow up being hunted," she said. He studied her, then gestured to the folder. "It's all in there. The parts we could dig up without waking old ghosts." Racheal's fingers hovered over the brass clip, but didn't open it yet. "Why give it to me?" Boris hesitated. "Because I don't think you saved me out of luck. I think you were meant to be in that moment. And maybe the city's shadows owe you answers." She opened the folder slowly. Inside were photographs, grainy surveillance, yellowed arrest records, names she hadn't seen since she was a child, scribbling her father's words in old notebooks. Her mother's name. Her father's last known alias. A photograph of her at 7, standing outside a funeral parlor with eyes too old for the dress she wore. She flipped through page after page, the weight of it all pressing into her chest like a slow collapse. Boris didn't interrupt. He poured a glass of water and set it near her elbow without speaking. Only when she reached the last page, an image of her father's file marked status, unknown, did she speak. "Is he dead?" "We don't know," Boris said. "He vanished after the Callisto collapse. No body. No witnesses. Just gone." She closed the folder and stared at it. "And you? What do you want out of this?" Boris looked down at his glass, as if considering a lie before choosing the truth. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "You did something no one's done in 20 years. You made me hesitate. That takes more than courage. That takes knowing something most people pretend not to see." Racheal leaned forward. Then tell me something straight. Ask, have I been bait my whole life? The silence stretched long between them. Then Boris said yes. And I think it's time we figure out who laid the trap. She exhaled through her nose, jaw tight. Then I want full access. Not just this file, everything connected to it. Boris raised a brow. You know what that means, right? It means you stop treating me like a waitress who got lucky and start treating me like someone who's ready to play. The flicker of something unreadable passed through Boris's face, not approval, not resistance. Maybe recognition. Maybe memory. You'll have what you need, he said. But once you step into this, there's no clean exit. I never had a clean entrance, she replied. Might as well go all the way. Outside, the snow was falling harder now. Thick flakes turning the streets white, covering every footprint, every trace. Racheal walked out of the building with the file clutched to her chest, head down, breath fogging the cold. Somewhere deep in the alleys of her memory, she heard her mother's voice humming a lullaby with no name. And for the first time in years, she let it hurt. Have you ever uncovered a truth that changed the way you saw your own past or someone else's? If the story moved you or made you pause, drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about the power of secrets and how sometimes the truth chooses us long before we're ready. Boris Palermo didn't trust many men, but the few he did were chosen with surgical precision. Trust, in his world, wasn't earned with time or loyalty. It was earned with silence, obedience, and an unwavering understanding of consequence. So when things began slipping, information leaking, shipments rerouted, allies growing cold, Boris didn't look outward. He looked inward. Because rot, he knew, started at the roots, not the leaves. The first sign came in the form of a misdirected shipment. A warehouse that had always operated like clockwork suddenly shut its doors 2 hours early, without warning. The next day, a competitor intercepted a deal that had been arranged in private weeks prior. Boris didn't raise his voice. He simply circled a name in red ink. Johnny Marin. Johnny had been with him for almost 18 years. His consigliere. His voice of reason in more volatile times. Sharp suits, polished shoes, and a habit of speaking only when necessary. But lately, Johnny had been avoiding eye contact. Delegating more. Taking private calls in the middle of meetings and brushing off subtle questions with the ease of a practiced liar. Boris noticed every twitch, every blink, and most of all, every silence. Racheal could sense the tension when she next visited the townhouse. The usual stillness of Boris's world had sharpened into something colder. Like the rooms themselves were listening. She waited in the den this time, not the office, and when Boris entered, he didn't pour drinks or offer chairs. He just handed her a folder. Thin. Labeled only with a date. Her mother's. She opened it without hesitation. The contents weren't like the previous file. This one felt unfinished, partial, like a story with the ending torn out. Photos from the scene, witness statements, and one report that stood out, possible retaliation due to involvement in prior activities. It was underlined. And next to it, scribbled in the margin, 2 initials, GM. She looked up slowly. Johnny Marin? Boris nodded once. He signed off on the original suppression report. Buried the drive-by as a random act of violence. Racheal blinked, her jaw tight. And you didn't know? I didn't look closely. Back then, you were just a kid in a dead woman's shadow. Now, you're asking the right questions. Racheal closed the folder. I want the rest. There is no rest yet, Boris said. But I'll give you full access to my archives. You'll have to dig for what you want. And in exchange, she asked, arms crossed. Boris leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You keep your silence until I'm ready to deal with him. Publicly. I'm not here to destroy you, she said. Just the part of you that let a man like him stay this long. For the first time, Boris looked at her like an equal. Not a survivor. Not a pawn. But someone capable of setting fire to a kingdom without ever raising her voice. Deal, he said. In the days that followed, Boris moved with quiet fury. He pulled files. Checked cameras. Cross-referenced meetings that never happened and calls that weren't logged. Each thread Johnny had left behind, Boris followed like a surgeon tracking a poison through the bloodstream of his empire. Racheal watched from the sidelines, silent, alert, absorbing every moment. She noticed how the men around Boris deferred to him more carefully now, as if something invisible had shifted, as if they sensed that the center had shifted from power to precision. She caught Johnny watching her once, just a glance, nothing more. But in that single moment, she understood something deeper than suspicion. He saw her as a threat. The Eastern Syndicate made their first move in Chinatown. A small club, technically neutral territory, burned from the inside out. No warning. No claims. Just a message carved into the blackened bar. You hesitated. We didn't. Boris stared at the photo for a long time. He didn't speak, but Racheal felt the storm in him. Not rage. Disappointment. Betrayal. Because someone had opened the door from the inside, and now the wolves weren't circling. They were already in the room. He called a meeting in the back of the wine cellar beneath La Rouse. Only 4 people were invited: Boris, Johnny, Racheal, and Marco, the quiet enforcer who rarely spoke unless he needed to end something. The room was cool, the lights low, the air rich with dust and secrets. Boris sat at the head of the table, fingers laced. Racheal stood by the wall, arms folded, watching. I need someone to explain, Boris said softly, how the Eastern boys knew about the Chinatown deal before it went through. Johnny looked up. Calm. You think I told them? I don't think, Boris said. I verify. And? Johnny asked, leaning back with too much ease. What did you verify? Boris didn't answer. Instead, he tossed a recorder onto the table. A click. A whir. And then Johnny's voice filled the room. If he doesn't die at La Rouse, we move to phase 2. I've already greased the rest. Silence. Then a faint laugh. It'll be clean. He'll never see it coming. Johnny didn't flinch. Didn't stutter. He just looked at the recorder. Then at Boris. You always were dramatic, he said. Theatrical, even. He stood slowly, brushing his jacket smooth. So what now? You kill me in front of her. He glanced toward Racheal. You going to let her see that side of you? No, Boris said quietly. I'm going to let her choose. Racheal didn't move. She stepped forward slowly, stopping just short of Johnny's shadow. You signed off on my mother's case. Buried it. It was paperwork, Johnny said. I didn't pull the trigger. But you knew who did. He smiled. I knew everything. The cellar felt smaller now. The air tighter. Boris didn't speak. Neither did Marco. It was Racheal's voice that broke the silence. You thought I was just a girl with a tray, she said. But I've been watching men like you my whole life. You kill with convenience. I kill with choice. Johnny scoffed. So what's your choice, little waitress? Racheal leaned in. Not here. Not now. But your life, every piece of it, will come apart in silence. She stepped back. And when it does, no one will see it coming. Just like you wanted. Boris rose. Marco, he said. Take him somewhere quiet. Keep him breathing. For now, Johnny didn't fight. He didn't beg. But the look he gave Racheal as he passed her was the look of a man who realized too late that the game had changed. That the rules weren't his anymore. And that sometimes, the quietest player was the one holding the real knife. When they were alone again, Boris poured 2 drinks. One for himself. One for her. He didn't raise his glass, didn't toast. He simply said, you could have asked me to end him. Racheal nodded. But I want him to feel what he made us live with: doubt. Fear. Waiting. She looked down into her glass. Besides, this isn't the end. It's just the first move. Outside, the city lights flickered like stars scattered across the dark. Somewhere, men were already choosing sides. Somewhere, another fire was waiting to be lit. And at the center of it all, a girl who used to serve drinks was now rewriting the rules of survival. The next morning, Racheal opened her eyes to the sound of silence, but not the peaceful kind. It was the absence of threat, yes, but also of comfort. Her apartment, once a hollow shell of routines, now felt smaller, like the walls themselves had learned her secrets. She sat up slowly, the file Boris had given her still resting on the side table, unopened since last night. Outside her window, the snow continued to fall, soft and soundless, like the city was waiting for her next move. She didn't go to La Rouse. Not yet. She needed air first, clarity. Needed to know what part of herself still belonged to the life she'd lived before that night. The morning walks she used to take, short, anonymous, now came with trailing shadows. She turned down 2 alleys and found one man in a black coat pretending to smoke behind a dumpster. He wasn't terrible at hiding it, but he wasn't trying very hard either. By the time she reached the corner cafe, there was another man inside, already seated, pretending to read the Tribune. She walked past him and didn't break stride. Boris hadn't lied. He'd stationed men around her, plainclothes watchers who wouldn't speak unless the sky fell. It was meant to be protection. But it didn't feel like safety. It felt like a velvet-lined cage. When she confronted him, she didn't ask for a meeting. She simply walked into the townhouse again, unannounced, her boots wet with slush and resolve. The guards didn't stop her. Boris looked up from his desk, not surprised. "They told me you'd show," he said. "Eventually." "I'm not relocating," she said before he could offer her a seat. No new name, no safe house, no disappearing act. Boris studied her, fingers steepled. "Racheal, I said no," she cut in firm. "You don't get to pull me out of the fire and then tuck me away like I'm a loose thread." "You're not a threat," he said slowly. "You're the knife they didn't see coming. That's why they'll try again." "Let them," she said. "I'm tired of running. I'm tired of hiding. If someone's watching me, I want to look them in the eye." Boris leaned back, his jaw tightening as if weighing what to do with a woman who refused the armor he offered. "You saved my life," he said. "Let me protect yours." "You don't owe me protection," she replied. "You owe me the truth." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was respect, settling into the cracks between 2 people used to being misunderstood. He finally nodded. "Fine. But you don't walk alone." "Not yet." "Then make them invisible," she said. "If I see them again, it's over." "You'll be under the floorboards, not in the game," he said. "Exactly," she said. "And I didn't come this far to vanish." She returned to La Rouse that same evening. Not as a waitress, but as a woman in motion. The manager, Alain, looked up from his desk in the back and paused. "You sure?" he asked. "After what happened?" "I was here before the explosion didn't happen," she said. "I'll be here after." The restaurant felt different now. The lights glowed the same, but the edges were sharper. Every face at every table was a possibility. Every smile had a shadow behind it. Racheal moved through the space like it was her stage, not serving, not watching, but observing. Owning. The staff didn't say much. A few nodded. One whispered, "Good to have you back," as she passed, but none asked questions. They all knew something had changed, even if they didn't know what. Boris had made sure no rumors turned into headlines. But Racheal could feel it, the shift in air, the way conversations dimmed when she entered the room. 3 nights in, she caught him. Not Johnny, he was still locked away in whatever warehouse Boris kept quiet problems, but someone else. A guest. A man who always arrived 10 minutes after her shift started, always sat at the edge of the bar, and never finished his drink. He tipped well. He smiled easily. Too easily. She watched him from the corner of her eye, studied how his hand hovered near his phone too long. How he adjusted the cuff of his sleeve like it wasn't tight enough, when in reality, he was pressing a button inside the lining. A signal, maybe? A warning. Or a confirmation. She didn't approach him. Not yet. But she memorized his face. Olive skin. Shaved jaw. Eyes too pale for someone who belonged to the dark corners of the city. He wasn't one of Boris's. She would have recognized the walk. This man didn't walk like he answered to anyone. He walked like he recorded what everyone else did, then sold it to the highest bidder. That night, Racheal stayed late. After closing, after the last wine bottle had been corked and the staff had disappeared into the city's breath, she walked the floor once more slowly, checking, listening. And when she reached table 7, the same table where it all began, she crouched. Beneath the table, nothing. But beside the base, tucked under the leg of the booth, she found it. A transmitter. No bigger than a coin. She didn't panic. Didn't call for Boris. She simply slipped it into her pocket, walked into the office, and made a phone call. He answered on the second ring. "Yes." "He's back," she said. "And he brought a friend." "Do you want him gone?" Boris asked. "No," she said. I want him to think I didn't notice. A pause. Why? Because if he thinks I'm just another pretty face behind a wine tray, he'll get sloppy. And I need sloppy. Boris exhaled slowly. You're turning into a predator. No, she said calmly. I've always been one. You're just the first person who saw it. The next night, the man returned. Same routine. Same seat. Same untouched drink. But this time, Racheal wasn't playing defense. She sent him a glass of bourbon on the house. He raised a brow. She raised her chin. Game on. That small act told him something. That she saw him. That she knew. And that she wasn't afraid. From then on, he changed. Not overtly, but enough. He sat straighter. Smiled less. Checked his watch more often. Which told her all she needed to know. He was receiving orders. And whoever was giving them was getting nervous. The trap had already begun to tighten. Not around her, but around whoever still thought she was the soft spot in Boris Palermo's empire. She wasn't the soft spot. She was the fuse. And the room had just filled with gas. If someone powerful offered you total protection at the cost of your independence, would you take it? Racheal chose clarity over comfort, strength over silence. What would you have done in her shoes? Drop your answer in the comments. Your perspective might be the turning point in someone else's story. The transmitter hadn't been the last breadcrumb, just the first. After that, the pattern shifted. Racheal knew it because she felt it in her bones, the same way a storm announces itself through pressure. The man at the bar missed a night, then returned with new cologne and a tighter jaw. That meant someone had warned him. Someone close. Someone who still had access to both her world and Boris's. She didn't say anything immediately. She watched. Waited. Let the tension spool tighter while she planned. There were whispers now, silent nods between men in suits who never looked her in the eye. A lingering glance from a new bartender. A laugh that didn't reach the eyes of the hostess. The air at La Rouse was different, like everyone knew a secret they weren't brave enough to speak aloud. On the fourth night, she walked into Boris's private office and shut the door behind her. He looked up from his desk, reading glasses perched on his nose, a half-drunk glass of Chianti beside him. You've got that look, he said. The one that usually ends in someone bleeding. Racheal didn't smile. I want to set a trap. Boris raised an eyebrow. What kind of trap? The kind where I act like I'm betraying you, she said. Just enough to draw out the real traitor. He leaned back, arms crossed. You think they're watching you that closely? I know they are, she replied. Let them think I'm still just the girl with a notepad. Let them believe they've caught me slipping. There was a long pause as Boris weighed her words. The idea was dangerous. Risky. But not reckless. Finally, he nodded once. What do you need? One night, she said. A meeting. At the bar. Just you and me. I'll make it look like I'm handing you something. Whispering something. Just enough for the wrong person to make the wrong move. He exhaled slowly. They might come after you. Good, she said. That means it's working. The night they chose was a Friday, busy enough for noise, quiet enough for shadows. Racheal wore something understated but sharp. Black slacks, a fitted blouse, her hair tied back like she didn't have time to hide. Boris arrived exactly on time, alone, without his usual entourage. That alone sent a message. The king, stripped down, meeting the girl who once saved him. They didn't speak at first. Just a nod across the floor, a soft smile, a seat offered. Racheal slid into the booth across from him, slipped a small black envelope from her coat, and placed it between them like it carried weight. It didn't. It was empty. But appearances mattered more than truth tonight. She leaned in close, lips near his ear, and whispered just loud enough for nearby mics to catch. Do you believe me now? Boris nodded slowly. Too late to go back. She sat upright again, her face unreadable, her hand resting on the envelope like it was glued there. Behind the bar, a camera lens blinked red. In the control room below, Marco and Alan watched the screens. They weren't alone. Two of Boris's best tech men sat beside them, headphones on, monitors glowing. The feed was silent, but the body language said everything. At 9:12 p.m., Johnny entered the frame. He wasn't supposed to be there. His exile had been quiet, clean. Boris had given orders to keep him out of view, out of everything. But there he was, tucked near the back, phone in hand, thumb dancing over the screen. "Get ready," Marco said, without taking his eyes off the screen. At 9:14, Johnny's lips moved. A whisper. Then he lifted his phone to his ear and turned his back. The camera behind him caught everything, the angle, the call log on the screen, the words mouthed under his breath. He was too confident, too quick to act. And that was the mistake. Later, when they replayed the footage, it would show that Johnny had made the call exactly 6 seconds after Racheal leaned in. Too fast for genuine surprise. Too fast to confirm. It meant one thing. He already knew what was supposed to happen. The trap had worked. But what came next hit harder than anyone expected. When Johnny was brought in, not dragged, not cuffed, just escorted, Racheal was waiting. She stood near the corner of Boris's office, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. Boris said nothing. He let her lead. Johnny was still calm. "So this is how it ends?" he said, smoothing his jacket. "A girl with a notepad plays the spider?" Racheal stepped forward. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for answers." "What do you want to know?" he asked. "I'm already dead to this city." Her voice was low. "My mother." For the first time, Johnny blinked. Just once. But it was enough. "Drive-by," he said. "Wrong place, wrong time." "You signed the report," she said. "You buried it." He shrugged. "We all bury things." Racheal didn't move. "Did you know who pulled the trigger?" Johnny smiled slowly, but there was no warmth in it. "I told them to do it." Her breath caught. "Why?" "Because your father ran," he said. "And in this world, you don't get to run without leaving something behind." The silence in the room grew thick and unmoving. Boris stood now, his hands clenched behind his back. Racheal didn't cry, didn't scream. She just nodded, like something inside her had already known. "You killed her to punish him," she said. "You killed a woman who made sandwiches and folded laundry and kissed scraped knees." Johnny didn't answer. He didn't have to. The truth had already spoken. Boris stepped forward. "Marco," he said. "Take him out the back. Lock him down." "You're not going to kill me?" Johnny asked. "No," Boris replied. "She'll decide what happens to you. Later." When they were alone, Boris looked at Racheal. Her shoulders were shaking, but her face was stone. "You don't have to carry this," he said. "I already have," she replied. "Since I was 12. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't offer an apology. He simply stood beside her in silence, the only kind of solidarity that didn't require words. And when she finally turned to leave, she didn't look back. Because now she wasn't just a girl who had questions. She was a woman with a target. And that made her more dangerous than any man in the room. The night smelled of iron and salt, the kind of smell that clung to concrete, to old memories, to blood spilled too long ago to forget. The black sedan came to a slow stop outside the warehouse near the river, its headlights slicing through fog that drifted low across the asphalt. Boris stepped out first, his coat whipping in the wind, followed by Marco and 2 men Racheal had never seen before. They didn't speak, didn't look at her. Only she and Boris exchanged a glance, one filled with the weight of things neither could unsay. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured, voice even but softer than usual. "And yet, here I am," she replied. He didn't argue. He never really did when it came to her, not anymore. The warehouse loomed before them like a sleeping giant, its metal doors rusted but still strong, its windows covered in grime thick enough to swallow light. Inside, the echo of footsteps greeted them, the sound traveling up into rafters lost in shadow. A single bulb hung from a wire, flickering over a chair placed dead center beneath it. And in that chair sat Johnny Marin. He looked smaller now, stripped of the silk suits and confidence. Still, his smirk hadn't faded. It curled lazily across his face when he saw her. "So the waitress decided to join the grown-ups," he said. His wrists were bound with thick rope, his cheek bruised, but his voice carried the same arrogance as always. "Didn't think you'd want front-row seats to something like this." Racheal stepped forward, her boots scraping the floor, her face unreadable. "You killed my mother," she said quietly. Johnny shrugged. "Indirectly." "You ordered it," she pressed. He tilted his head. "I approved it." Call it what you want. It was business. Boris's hand twitched at his side, but he didn't move. His eyes were on Racheal, not to stop her, but to see what she would do. You think murder is business? She asked. Johnny laughed, dry and hollow. Everything's business, sweetheart. Even you. You think Boris here isn't using you? You think he doesn't have a reason to keep you close? You're just another chip on his table. Boris said nothing. His stillness was its own kind of violence, a storm waiting for command. Racheal didn't flinch. Maybe, she said softly. But the difference is, I know what I'm worth. She circled him once, slow, her footsteps steady and deliberate. The light caught in her eyes as she leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Tell me why. Why her? Why us? Johnny met her gaze with an unsettling calm. Because your father ran, he said, grinning. Because people like him don't get to walk away clean. Your mother was a reminder. A message that no one leaves this life whole. The words struck like cold steel, sharp and final. Racheal's breathing faltered for only a second before steadying again. She straightened, every inch of her trembling replaced with focus. And the little girl who watched, she asked. What was she supposed to learn? Johnny chuckled. Not to make the same mistake. Racheal stared at him for a long moment, then said, she didn't. Boris shifted slightly, his patience thinning. Enough, he said. His voice carried the tone of command that could still silence entire rooms. You've said what you came to say, Johnny. You've written your own epitaph. He turned to Marco, giving a silent nod. Marco stepped forward, but Racheal's voice cut through the air like a blade. Wait. Everyone froze. Her eyes never left Johnny. You wanted to send a message, she said. Let me send one back. Boris frowned. Racheal, no, she said firmly. You've had your way of doing things for decades. Tonight, you let me have mine. Her voice wasn't pleading. It was resolute. Unshakable. Boris studied her face for a long time. There was no fear there, only clarity, the kind that came when someone had already made peace with what came next. Finally, he gave a slow nod. Fine, he said quietly. Do it your way. Marco stepped back. Johnny's smirk faltered just slightly. Racheal stepped closer until she could see her reflection in his eyes. You said it was business, she murmured. But business changes. And this time, I'm the one who sets the terms. Johnny swallowed hard, though he tried not to show it. What are you going to do? Kill me? She shook her head. No. Death's too quick. I want you to live long enough to know what it feels like to lose control. She turned to Boris. He has accounts, doesn't he? Safe houses. Contacts. Boris nodded once. He does. Then take them, she said. Every cent. Every name. Every ounce of power he built on other people's pain. Strip him clean. Leave him with nothing. Let him watch the empire he betrayed dissolve piece by piece, knowing it was a woman he thought beneath him who pulled the strings. Boris's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, pride, maybe, or recognition. Consider it done, he said. And him? Marco asked from the shadows. What do we do with him? Racheal turned back to Johnny. He wanted to send messages. Let him deliver one. She leaned closer, voice low and steady. Tell everyone what happens when you touch the wrong life. Tell them what it costs to underestimate the quiet ones. Johnny's eyes widened. You think they'll let me live? She smiled faintly. They'll let you try. The room fell into silence again, the hum of the overhead light filling the space where violence might have lived. Boris stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on Racheal's shoulder. You surprised me again, he said quietly. I thought you'd want his blood. Blood doesn't clean anything, she replied. It just makes the floor slicker. He studied her face for a long moment before nodding. You're right, he said. And for the record, he's not walking away free. He's walking away haunted. Racheal nodded. Good. So am I. When it was over, Johnny was let out, not beaten, not dragged, but escorted, the irony sharp enough to taste. Racheal stood by the doorway as they took him away, the cold from the night rushing back in. She didn't watch him go. She didn't need to. He was already a ghost in her mind, fading into the static of the city's endless noise. Outside, the snow had turned to rain. It hit the river in long, dark streaks, breaking the reflection of streetlights into trembling shards. Racheal stood by the water, arms crossed, staring at her reflection in the ripples. Boris joined her quietly, the umbrella above them barely covering both. "You did something tonight I couldn't," he said softly. "You stopped the cycle." "No," she murmured. "I just changed the ending." Boris nodded slowly. "What will you do now?" She looked out at the city, the glow of Chicago blinking through mist like embers refusing to die. "Find the truth," she said. "All of it. Even the parts you haven't told me yet." He didn't deny it. "And if the truth hurts?" he asked. She turned to him. "Then I'll live with it. At least it'll be mine." They stood in silence for a while, the rain softening the edges of the night, washing away the last traces of the war that had begun long before either of them knew it. For the first time, Racheal didn't feel like prey or a survivor or even an avenger. She felt awake, alive, dangerous in her own right. And somewhere deep inside, she understood that she had crossed another threshold, one that even Boris Palermo couldn't follow. The file was waiting for her in a thick manila envelope, sealed with a single strip of black wax. No initials, no markings, just weight. Boris handed it to her wordlessly in the foyer of his townhouse, the fire behind him casting long shadows against the floor. Racheal took it without speaking, the silence between them heavy, respectful. There were no instructions, no expectations. Only a nod, permission to know. She didn't open it right away. The weight of it was familiar, not because she'd held it before, but because she'd carried it in her chest for years. Truth had a texture. And sometimes it was heavier than lies. She walked out into the early dusk, past the edge of the city, past the places where people whispered her name without understanding it. She needed somewhere the noise couldn't follow. By the time she reached the lake, the sun had started to set. The water was still, unmoving, like it was holding its breath with her. Wind skimmed across the surface, cold but welcome, brushing through her hair as she sat on the bench by the dock. For a long moment, she just stared at the envelope in her lap. The last unopened door in a house she'd spent years trying to escape. When she finally broke the seal, it snapped like a bone. Inside, reports, surveillance photos, hand-scrawled notes in margins she recognized from crime scenes she'd only imagined. Her mother's name appeared again and again, Grace Marie Zackary, attached to dates, timestamps, and fragments of conversations that had never been meant to surface. There were autopsy notes, witness statements, and at the center of it all, one name circled 3 times, Johnny Marin. Her throat tightened. She turned the page. A photo fell out black and white, slightly blurred, but unmistakable. Her mother, exiting a grocery store, bags in hand, looking over her shoulder as if someone had already warned her. The timestamp was 6 days before the murder. Racheal ran her fingers over the image, her hand trembling. Her mother had known. She read until the sun dropped beneath the waterline, until the light faded and her eyes ached. Every page carved something deeper into her. Every paragraph dug up a truth she had suspected but never dared to confirm. Her mother wasn't caught in crossfire. She was chosen, stalked, watched, then erased. When she reached the end of the file, there was no closure. No apology. Just facts. Cold, mechanical, precise. Racheal stared at the last page, then looked out at the lake again, her reflection faint in the dark water. And slowly, she stood. She took the folder to the edge of the dock, pulled out a matchbook from her coat pocket, one of Boris's, from a restaurant long since closed. The first match snapped, broke. Her fingers were shaking. The second flared to life. She held it to the bottom corner of the top page. The paper curled inward immediately, flames licking up the edge like it had been waiting to be destroyed. She fed one page after another to the fire, eyes dry, heart hammering. The smoke stung her eyes, but she didn't cry. She couldn't. The last page turned to ash just as she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't turn right away. She knew who it was before he spoke. Boris's presence was steady, silent, a mountain, not a storm. He stopped a few feet behind her, not imposing, not waiting. "I thought you might want to be alone," he said quietly. "I did," she replied, still facing the lake. but now I don't." He came to stand beside her. They looked out at the water together, neither speaking for a long time. The wind carried the scent of ash and lakeweed. Racheal watched the last blackened edge of the folder drift off the dock and disappear into the rippling dark. It was done. "I didn't save you to become you," she said finally. Her voice didn't shake. "I saved you because someone had to." Boris nodded slowly. "You reminded me of something I forgot a long time ago," he said. "That there's a difference between power and purpose." She glanced at him. "And which one do you have now?" He met her gaze. "Whichever one you see when you look at me." That surprised her. Not the honesty, but the humility beneath it. Boris Palermo didn't kneel to anyone. But in that moment, in the quiet with no witnesses, he offered something he had never given freely before. Respect. They stood in silence, two shadows reflected in the water's edge, neither of them needing to speak to be understood. For once, she felt like the pieces inside her weren't clashing, they were shifting into place. Not whole yet, but real. And strong. She turned back toward the path, toward the city, her steps slow but certain. Boris followed a pace behind, not leading, not following, just there. Present. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was walking away from her past. She felt like she was finally walking into her life. If you had the chance to destroy the truth that hurt you most, would you burn it or keep it? If Racheal's decision made you reflect on your own need for closure, drop your thoughts in the comments. Some fires cleanse more than they destroy, and sometimes, letting go is the most radical strength of all. The months after the fire were quiet, but not idle. Chicago, a city that thrived on secrets and shadows, held its breath as the usual chaos began to still. Whispers that once started through alleyways now faded into silence. No more surprise fires. No more quiet betrayals. Those who had plotted against Boris Palermo had either disappeared or learned that survival required submission or respect. But Boris had changed. Not in the way outsiders imagined. His power was still intact. His name still spoke with a kind of reverence that kept men awake at night. Yet within the walls of his world, a shift had occurred. Meetings that were once closed now had an extra chair. And the woman who occupied it never raised her voice, never barked commands. She just listened and then spoke once, and that was enough. Racheal's presence in Boris's world became something unspoken yet immovable. She wasn't his mistress, wasn't his fixer, wasn't even his second in command. She was something stranger, a truth-teller in a world built on masks. And in rooms filled with men who bled loyalty and feared failure, her calm gaze often said more than a loaded gun. When she walked into a room, no one stood. But they straightened. They lowered their voices. They chose their words more carefully. Because Racheal had done the one thing none of them could, she had told Boris no, and lived not only to speak again, but to be heard louder. At first, her presence was a curiosity, then a rumor, then a warning. If she's there, people whispered, it means he wants the truth, not comfort. She never asked for that role. It wasn't power she craved. It was precision. And that, more than anything, made her invaluable. Boris began to rely on her in quiet ways. A glance across a meeting table. A text with nothing but a name. A silence that asked her opinion without needing to be spoken aloud. She didn't advise with threats or ego. She asked questions no one else dared to. What does this cost? What happens if we say nothing? Who loses, and why does it matter? She didn't want the empire. But she knew how it worked now. Knew how it breathed, how it leaked. How to plug the holes without drawing blood. The men who once saw her as a novelty began to see her as a standard. And soon, they began to measure their words, not by how Boris might react, but by whether Racheal would nod or quietly walk out of the room. Boris noticed. He didn't say it aloud, that would have diluted the weight of it. But he began speaking differently to her. Less guarded. More deliberate. He would pour her a drink after meetings. Let her sit in silence with him and not expect conversation. Trust in his world was rare. But respect, that was sacred. And she had both. One evening, they stood on the rooftop of the building Boris rarely brought anyone to. From there, the city looked smaller, tamer. Like a kingdom beneath their feet, twinkling and breathing and pretending to sleep. Racheal sipped from a glass of whiskey she barely touched. Boris lit a cigarette, the ember glowing like a warning against the dusk. "You've rebuilt it," she said. "The cracks. The damage. It's clean again." Boris shook his head slightly. "Nothing in this city is clean. I've just made the mess quieter." She glanced over. "And what about you?" He looked at her. "What about me?" She turned fully to face him. "You've protected everyone else. Fixed the leaks. Shut down the fires. But what do you want now?" He didn't answer right away. He rarely did when her questions cut too close. But then his voice came low even. "I want to know if I still have a future that doesn't end in violence." She set her glass down on the ledge. "You do. But it doesn't look like the one you built." He nodded slowly, letting her words settle like dust. Then he asked the one question he hadn't dared to until now. "And you? What do you want?" Racheal didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She just said what had been true since the night she slid a note into his hand. "To walk beside you. Not behind you." Boris's jaw tensed, not with resistance, but with something closer to acceptance. And for the first time, he didn't speak back. He just nodded. That night, they didn't return to the townhouse. They walked the streets instead, no guards, no cars, just two people who had survived too much to pretend anymore. A girl who used to carry plates. A man who used to carry the weight of a city in his fists. They weren't equals by title, but by choice. And that, in their world, was worth more than any crown. The people began to notice. Not the city at large, they were too busy scrolling through news cycles and pretending their streets weren't run by ghosts. But those who mattered knew that Boris Palermo now walked with someone at his side. A woman who didn't speak often, but when she did, even the old guards leaned in. Some tried to challenge it, of course. Power never transitions without resistance. One night, an enforcer from the old days tried to test her, questioned her in front of a full room, threw her past at her feet like an insult. Racheal didn't blink. She asked him one question. "When was the last time you made a decision that didn't end in blood?" The room went quiet, and he didn't come back. Even Boris had to admit, she had found a way to bend the rules without breaking them. She wasn't soft, but she didn't deal in fear. She dealt in consequence. And those who challenged her rarely did it twice. Weeks later, they stood once again in his office, this time reviewing ledgers, not threats. Racheal flipped through pages, then paused, her fingers settling on a name she hadn't seen in years. "This man helped launder through my father's old contacts," she said. Boris looked down. "Do you want him gone?" She shook her head. "No. I want him to know I know. That's enough." Boris met her eyes. "You're becoming terrifying." "No," she said. "I'm becoming seen." He smiled then, a rare thing, soft and short-lived. But real. And in that moment, Racheal understood something no one else did. The throne had never been empty. It had just been waiting for someone who didn't want it. The sky above the courthouse was overcast, the kind of gray that turned the world colorless and expectant. Reporters lined the sidewalk, cameras aimed, microphones extended like weapons in waiting. Flashbulbs burst as Racheal Zackary stepped out of the black car, dressed in a simple navy coat, hair tied back, face unreadable. No one walked beside her. No security. No entourage. Just her, steady, measured, the calm before something irreversible. Every step she took toward the stone steps echoed louder than the press could narrate. A few officers turned as she passed, not out of protocol, but out of recognition. They knew who she was. Everyone did. Not because she carried a title, but because she had done what no one else had. She broke the silence without breaking the city. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Lawyers with stiff collars. Journalists hunched over notepads. Strangers in back rows who just wanted to witness history. Johnny Marin sat at the defense table, suit pressed, mouth taut, but the swagger was gone. In his place was a man who had watched everything slip through his fingers: power, trust, and now freedom. Boris wasn't there. Not physically. His absence was deliberate, to protect the message. This wasn't about him anymore. It never really was. Racheal had insisted on that. She sat calmly in the witness chair when called. The room seemed to hold its breath. The oath was given. She raised her hand, spoke clearly, and waited for the questions. She wasn't afraid. She had already walked through every kind of fire and come out cleaner than most. "Miss Zackary," the prosecutor began, "can you describe the first time you saw the defendant?" She nodded. "At La Rouse. The night he attempted to coordinate a hit on Boris Palermo using surveillance and an explosive device planted under his table." Murmurs rose from the gallery. The judge's gavel cracked once. The room stilled again. "Were you aware at that time of who Mr. Marin was?" "I knew the name," Racheal said. "But not the face. That came later." "Why did you get involved?" She looked at the jury then, her voice soft but steady. "Because silence is how monsters survive." The words landed like a hammer, not just in the room, but across every news outlet tuned in. Some reporter in the back muttered something into a microphone. The judge didn't stop her. No one did. "And your mother?" the prosecutor asked gently. "How is she connected to the defendant?" Racheal hesitated. Just a breath. Then answered. "She was murdered when I was 12. Her death was signed off as a random act of gang violence." She turned her head, locking eyes with Johnny. "But he ordered it." "Because my father tried to leave the life. And in that world, leaving comes with a price." There was no emotion in her voice. No plea for pity. Just truth, delivered with the same quiet resolve that had once slipped a note into Boris Palermo's hand and stopped a man from sitting down to die. The defense tried to push back, tried to paint her as manipulated, emotional, biased. "You admit to working closely with Boris Palermo?" the defense attorney asked. "Yes," Racheal answered. "And you trust him?" "Yes." "So how can we know your testimony isn't influenced by his protection?" She leaned in slightly, eyes locked on the man trying to twist the truth. "Because I didn't save Boris Palermo for him. I saved him for the city." She paused. "And if he had turned out to be what Johnny is, I'd be sitting here testifying against him too." The courtroom shifted. The defense attorney sat back, flustered. Across the room, the jury watched her, not just listened, but watched her. Like something in her clarity made them remember what justice could sound like. The testimony continued, one question after another. She never faltered. She never raised her voice. She let the facts speak. Let the silence fall where it needed to. And when it was over, she stepped down without ceremony. Outside, the press surged toward the doors, but the officers held the line. Racheal exited quietly, not speaking, not waving, just walking the same way she had entered. Calm. Alone. But not unarmed. Truth was its own kind of weapon now. In a small room above the courthouse lobby, Boris watched from a live feed. He didn't speak. Didn't move. Just watched as the woman who once carried drinks through rooms of men became the one woman who made them all listen. Later that afternoon, the verdict came in. Guilty on all counts. Johnny would never breathe free air again. But Racheal didn't celebrate. She didn't cry. She just sat on a bench outside the courthouse, face tilted toward the clouds, as if waiting for rain that wouldn't come. A young reporter approached quietly, not with a camera, but with a question. "What happens now?" Racheal glanced at her. "The city keeps breathing. But maybe, for the first time, it learns to listen." That night, headlines spread across the city like embers from a long-smothered fire. Racheal Zackary testifies in landmark trial, ends code of silence. The waitress who dismantled the quiet mafia. Chicago's new power doesn't carry a gun, she carries the truth. And across the city, people remembered that sometimes revolutions don't come in gunfire or broken windows. Sometimes they arrive in notes passed across linen tables. In names whispered in courtrooms. In a woman's voice, clear and unwavering. The next morning, she walked into La Rouse again. Not to work, but just to sit. A table near the back. Coffee black. The same waitress who had once trained her took her order. "You okay?" the girl asked softly. Racheal looked up, smiled faintly. "I am now." And the city, for a breathless moment, stopped. Not in fear. Not in reverence. But in respect. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. There's another interesting one on your left screen that I think you'll really enjoy.